There was a time when computers were a hobby for strange people. An interest in technology was often comorbid with an inability to maintain eye contact and a penchant for correcting grammar. Slowly, however, the computer age began filtering through from business to wider society. A series of simultaneous innovations in Australia helped urge on the digital reformation. The Rudd government initiated work on a series of programs following its election in 2007 to bring all of Australia, including the education system, into the computer age. It had campaigned on bringing fast internet to most of Australia with what became the National Broadband Network. In opposition, the Liberal Party decried this as reckless spending and offered an alternative proposal which, they contended, would be cheaper and delivered sooner. The coalition governments of the 2010s decided that, rather than connecting homes directly via a high-speed fibre optic cable, homes would be brought onto the NBN using existing copper cables that would be connected to fibre optic cable by a node at the end of the street or similar intermediary. This had the effect of negating the speed gains by forcing data that came through the fibre optic cables at a high speed to reach their destination through the slower copper cables. As a result, it was reported in 2018 that Australia's internet speeds were slower than Kazakhstan's, despite Kazakhstan's annual internet consumption being around a tenth of Australia's. The Rudd government also brought in the Digital Education Revolution program, which, among other things, provided free laptops to high school students and supported schools across Australia to implement information and communication technology. The unfortunately acronymed DIR was an unprecedented investment in technologies that were still in question at the time. Malcolm Turnbull, as Shadow Minister for Communications, remarked that building 100 megabit per second connections was a torching of taxpayers' money. In 2018, Turnbull was mocked for having signed up to the 100 megabit per second connection tier of the NBN. At the same time, the Victorian government was making moves of its own. While both open source and off-the-shelf commercial learning management systems were established by the mid-2000s, the Bracks government had opted for a purpose-built system that was a generational leap ahead of contemporary systems. As a briefing paper from the Victorian Department of Education and Training put it, "The Ultranet cannot be described by any of the tags that are commonly used to describe ICT initiatives in education. It is not about online learning or content management or any other particular aspect. It is about bringing together the key processes involved in the day-to-day running of a school and a classroom. It pervades the very culture of the school, becoming an indispensable part of routine work practice." The Ultranet began as a pet project at a school in Melbourne's southeast. Darryl John Fraser had been teaching at Glen Waverley Secondary College since the early 70s and became principal in 1999. In 2002, he was given the Victorian Education Excellence Award for Outstanding School Leadership. While an assistant principal in the 1990s, Fraser oversaw the development of an intranet at the school by teachers and staff. The intranet enabled staff and students of the school to share and access administrative and curriculum-related information via a private network on a server at the school. The project garnered widespread attention in the education world, with delegations from across the country and overseas visiting Glen Waverley to see the system at work. As the system was custom built by self-described amateurs, it was not then designed to be shared or set up for other schools. Fraser suggested to the staff that had set up the system that they commercialise it and create a company called Core Technica for that purpose. Core Technica Proprietary Limited was created in 2002. The 3 staff who developed it were listed as directors, but Fraser was not. It was registered in the school, meetings of the company were held in the school, and development of the system occurred during school hours. Fraser's attitude was described as unusually commercial, given he was meant to be running a school rather than building a business. Fraser's next suggestion was for Core Technica to seek a capital injection to begin development of a commercialised intranet product. To that end, the 3 directors each put in $2,000 of their own money for a Mr. Victor So to travel to Malaysia to find investors. Fraser accompanied So to Malaysia, though it was never determined whether he paid his own way or not. So was unsuccessful in his mission. He had an agreement with Core Technica that, if they were unsatisfied with or refused the funding offer he facilitated, they would need to pay him $80,000. As no offer was facilitated, the parties agreed to waive the $80,000 in favour of Core Technica handing over all intellectual property to So. The existing intranet was developed in the course of the directors' work at Glen Waverley Secondary, so they were not at liberty to give that IP to So. They drew up new intellectual property documentation describing an intranet-type concept called Schoolscape. The company was then wound up without any revenue having been made. It was later noted that Fraser had cost these staff members thousands of dollars of their own money for no return, and exposed them to tens of thousands of dollars in potential liabilities. Fraser contended that any profits from Core Technica would have found their way back to the school, but no one else involved concurred with this view. Then something strange happened. Fraser was appointed Deputy Secretary of the Department of Education and Training. $8.6 billion a year was placed at the disposal of a man with no experience in financial management except as a school principal. Mr. Fraser's appointment to the Deputy Secretary position was, by all accounts, an extraordinary promotion. No one could recall any other occasion when a school principal, without any other executive level experience, had stepped directly into such a senior departmental position. It was said that the then Secretary of the Department, Grant Hehir, had appointed Fraser to drive a strong and innovative agenda, including through bringing online a system like the Glen Waverley Secondary Intranet that could be used in other schools. Among the groups interested in the intranet was Oracle, a tech giant that had, and still has, a large role in the database sector. At this time, Oracle was developing a product similar to the intranet called L360. Representatives from Oracle had met many times with Fraser, gave Glen Waverley Secondary free access to their products, and even performed a functional review of the intranet at no charge. Now in charge of the Office of Government School Education, Fraser began carrying out his remit and planning a new intranet that could be used across Victoria. This became known as the Student at Centre project. Developed by a team within the department, the project would be a trial run for a full-scale Ultranet. 2 of the 3 former directors of Core Technica, that is, former employees of Fraser, were employed to work on the project from the beginning, and the 3rd would come on board for the Ultranet. Oracle also worked on the project, but without being paid to do so, which meant that there was no requirement for the project to undergo a tender process. Oracle agreed to invest $1.5 million into developing a prototype to be used as a model to be expanded upon through the full Ultranet project, which would be required to go through a tender process. No other groups were invited to work on the pilot. At the time, a legal advisor to the government, Anne Dalton, advised that, though no tender was required for Student at Centre, the process made Oracle the natural choice for the Ultranet tender. If Oracle has already invested $1.5 million, gained information, and established close ties with the DET, it is likely to be at a competitive advantage to other bidders, and other bidders may be justifiably sceptical of their being successful in a public tender process. Not only would the course that Fraser was charting all but ensure Oracle won the contract, it would also render the government liable if the tender process was challenged in court. Dalton and other advisors told Fraser to put Student at Centre out to tender, but he ignored them. Mr. Fraser expressed a strongly held view that Oracle was the only company in the market with a product mature enough to use as the basis of the pilot project. Mr. Fraser would say, "When we're working with Oracle," as if it was a fait accompli. Fraser's tenure was marked by his willingness to grab gifts and hospitality that were offered to him with both hands. Mr. Fraser received personal benefits from Oracle during and after the Students at Centre project. When a departmental official expressed her concern to Mr. Fraser that staff should not accept dinners and flights from Oracle, she said Mr. Fraser told her, in effect, to lighten up. After raising the department's gifts policy with Fraser, she found herself sidelined from any decisions involving approval of travel for staff. Fraser was wined and dined, flown across the country and even internationally. For a trip to New York on Oracle's dime, Fraser sought approval from the Secretary of the Department on the basis that travel was required because fundamental design decisions about the Ultranet product would be made. No such decisions were made or were ever going to be made. The travel was to further Oracle's business interests, to the detriment of the Victorian taxpayer. Fraser was also forced to pay back thousands of dollars that he charged to the department's credit card for expensive dinners and alcohol. After that, he was required to run his expenses past the department's corporate services head. To get around this, he had his office manager use his departmental credit card to buy meals and alcohol for him, then approve these expenses as his office manager's financial delegate. Ultranet was announced by the Victorian government in late 2006. The Ultranet board was appointed soon after. As might be expected, Fraser was influential in the appointment of most board members, and many board members were known to Fraser. When an industry briefing was held in 2007, hundreds of companies showed up. There was plenty of interest in a project that was sure to cost tens of millions of dollars. The first tender process failed after all bids came in at above $100 million, far above the government's budget of $60.5 million. Treasury and industry both advised the department that the scope of the tender could not be met within the budget and timeline. This advice was ignored. The failure to heed this advice meant the $5 million spent on the tender had been wasted and the Ultranet was put a year behind schedule. A second tender, with a drastically reduced scope, was limited to a short list of 5 companies. The rules of the tender did not allow companies to collaborate on a bid, but Fraser bent the rules after Oracle made a request to submit a bid as a consortium. After receiving bids from 4 of the 5 companies, the project's commercial evaluation team, led by Mark Blayton, Ultranet project manager, reported to the board that RM Asia Pacific should be chosen over a consortium which included Oracle and CSG, a company which employed allies of Fraser and Oracle. The team noted CSG's lack of experience and need to grow to meet the needs of the contract. and Oracle's lack of contractual accountability or responsibility under the consortium arrangement. When they gave the board their report, Mr. Fraser's response was said to have been explosive. Mr. Bladen described Mr. Fraser as agitated, bright red in the face, shouting and swearing. In their many years of experience, Mr. Bladen and his team had never seen a reaction like it. The board rejected the report and instead endorsed the CSG Oracle consortium as the preferred tenderer. In the days between the board endorsing CSG Oracle and the endorsement being made public, 2 departmental officers, a friend of one of the officers, an Ultranet board member and his wife purchased shares in CSG. CSG's stock price rose steadily after the Ultranet announcement was made, from less than $1 to more than $2 by the end of the year. ASIC looked into this but elected not to pursue insider trading charges. One of the teachers that worked under Fraser at Glen Waverley Secondary, Frank Aloisio, had started his own consultancy, which worked with more than one of the groups that put in bids for the first tender. A day after CSG Oracle was chosen as the preferred tenderer, a group called ASG wrote to the Minister for Education. It informed the minister that it was suing Aloisio and CSG. It claimed that Aloisio had violated his agreement with ASG to serve them exclusively during their bid for the first tender. They sought orders that would not only put the CSG Oracle bid in jeopardy, but, if CSG Oracle were selected, CSG would immediately be liable to ASG for millions of dollars in damages. CSG did not disclose this during its bid for the second tender, despite the legal action's material relevance to the certainty of the bid. In 2009, ASG settled with CSG. CSG would pay ASG $4.2 million upon being awarded the Ultranet contract. Again, probity concerns were raised, but there was no evidence that Mr. Fraser or the board were prepared to give serious consideration to disqualifying CSG's bid. On the 9th of August 2010, the Ultranet was launched. The cronyism, amateurism and want of probity that had characterised the development of the Ultranet came home to roost. Students were told to stay home for the day while teachers came to grips with the new system. In Melbourne, school principals from across the state attended the launch event. A recording of a promotional video of the launch survives. While I will make a few remarks about the footage afterwards, it largely speaks for itself.
Welcome to the Connections 2010 Big Day Out and the launch of the Ultranet.
We thought we had to seize the opportunity to showcase one of the most significant investments this government's ever made into IT.
As the Ultranet coach hits the Victorian highways, Victorian educators, together with students and their parents, will hitch a ride along the information highway with the Ultranet.
We are living in a virtual world. Ultranet girl, you know that we are living in a virtual world, and I am an Ultranet. The Ultranet. The Ultranet, living in a virtual world. It's virtual, living in a virtual world. In a virtual world, in a virtual world. Oh, it's one to learn. They deserve every opportunity. So let's help them get the skills they need for the 21st century. 'Cause we are living in a virtual world, and I am an Ultranet girl. You know that we are living in a virtual world, and I am an Ultranet, living in a virtual world, and I am an Ultranet girl. You know that we are living in a virtual world, and I am an Ultranet girl.
So good morning, colleagues, and welcome to the Big Day Out, Connections 2010. And I hope this will be a day in which we all look back as a point in time when the world of government school education took a dramatic and irrevocable lurch into the future. Today, the senior leadership team rally for the Ultranet at the Melbourne Convention Centre, while our staff are in our schools using the application and the resource we created specifically to assist them to bring it to come alive. We arranged a very spectacular arrival on stage in an Ultranet coach. It's a hybrid vehicle powered by 2 sources of power. I believe our human Ultranet coaches and the 50,000 staff that are at our schools will propel our Ultranet through our system. We have a full house today, 3,125 principals and assistant principals. We have one minister. We have one Minister for Education, one secretary and his leadership team, together with about 400 corporate staff. But the big one, the one we're here today for, the one which we're here to celebrate, is the Ultranet. And the fact that government was prepared to invest $100 million to make sure that we had access to an open access framework, technology platform which allows us to share resources across the system to connect every parent, every teacher and every student, I think is an indicator of the trust this government has in us and the trust this minister has in us. But this didn't emerge on its own. The Ultranet, after all, is a wire basket, a simple framework that only comes alive when the expertise of our workforce is applied to it. It has been a difficult birth, and it's been 8 years in progress. It failed in the market the first time. We had to break down walls and barriers and ways of thinking within the department to allow the whole organisation to work collaboratively together to deliver on such a complex project, and we've done it. Even though, who could have guessed that the Ultranet went down yesterday? There was one thing I asked Diane Peck to do. Just make sure that the Ultranet works on Monday when every principal in the state is in this room. But there you go, the Ultranet went down and I'm told that at 10:30 it'll go up again. We've just emailed every teacher to tell them what the situation is, that the design space is struggling just a little bit, but it will come up. We've used it.
There are a few important things to note. Firstly, Fraser talks about the government's investment of $100 million. By the launch, the budget of the Ultranet had blown out by between $20 and $40 million, in addition to being 2 years late. Secondly, the idea that, after the first approach to market failed, they had to break down walls and barriers and ways of thinking of the department is laughable. The only thing that was broken down was the scope of the project, which was comprehensively reduced. Thirdly, Fraser's reference to a crash was a massive understatement. Across the state, teachers were uniformly unable to log on. Principals were all at the launch, so there was confusion as to what the teachers were expected to do next. At many schools, teachers were sent home as the Ultranet went down in the morning and was unusably slow in the afternoon. As one person who wrote to the Herald Sun asked, did no one consider the repercussions of all staff trying to access the site at one time? Ultranet coaches, employed to train the teachers, were left with nothing to do. Many parents were forced to take the day off work to take care of their children. It cost the state thousands of man-hours and millions of dollars in lost productivity. Not to be outdone, Fraser charged Victorians $1.4 million to put on the Ultranet's extravagant launch event. He was approved to spend $950,000, but far exceeded that amount without authorisation. Amongst that expenditure was around $80,000 for an event manager to direct and stage manage the single-day event, approximately $115,000 to one company for graphic design services for the day, and, most infamously, an Ultranet coach was driven onto the stage of the event at a cost of $22,000. It was noted that much of this expenditure, originating from outside the Ultranet's launch budget, came from funds that are intended for the benefit of schools and education. In September, Shadow Education Minister Martin Dixon spoke in the Victorian Legislative Assembly addressing the Ultranet. The system crashed for all teachers in all schools from early morning. Many schools had prepared alternative programs in the knowledge that the Ultranet would not cope on the day. In fact, a leaked departmental email indicated that the department knew the system would not cope with a mass logon. The minister was warned but did not listen. We then saw the great article in Shine magazine during the preceding week that talked about what a great day 9 August was and how it laid the foundations for a bright future for the Ultranet. The trouble is, it was written before the day. In fact, it was even published before the day. The Liberals held the Ultranet, alongside other projects like public transport ticketing system Myki and the Health Department's Ultranet equivalent HealthSmart, as examples of the ageing government's inability to manage major projects. On the 27th of November, the Brumby Labor government was ousted by a small margin, Labor's only defeat at a Victorian election this century. Not long after the election, inquiries began into expenditure on technology projects in Victoria. The Victorian Ombudsman handed down his report in late 2011, and the Victorian Auditor General followed a year later. The Ombudsman was not impressed with the manner in which the Ultranet had been brought about. It noted the failed first tender, the functionality that was lost from de-scoping in preparation for the second tender, and the cost overruns. It also found that not all expenditure on the project had been declared. In relation to expenditure on Ultranet coaches, at least $12 million in training costs was not recorded against the project. Despite this, the Ombudsman declared that the Ultranet is working in schools and there is widespread support for the concept. The Auditor General's report a year later was less optimistic. It is yet to achieve expected benefits for students, parents and schools. It is significantly late, more than 80% over its first announced budget, has very low uptake by users and does not have the functionality originally intended. While the Ombudsman expected an overrun of $38 million by June 2013, the Auditor General found a blowout of more than $100 million by the middle of 2012 and expected that to reach almost $120 million by June 2013. As far as scope is concerned, the Ultranet's business requirements were reduced by 90% from the 1,260 functions stated in the 2007 business case to the 131 functions contained in the 2008 request for tender specifications. The storage requirement and the number of users required to be able to use the system at once were both halved. The system's user base had collapsed since the Ombudsman's report. As the Auditor General noted, use of the Ultranet is well below expectations, with only 10% of students and 27% of teachers logging into the system. He also found that the launch day significantly tarnished the reputation of the Ultranet among teachers. Since then, many teachers have refused to try using the system again. As a consequence of deliberately poor record keeping, it remains unknown what the Ultranet cost. Depending on who you ask, it cost $74.6 million, according to the revised estimate of the Major Projects Committee of Cabinet, $180 million by June 2013, according to the Auditor General, $152 million according to PwC, $127 million according to Deloitte, or $230 to $240 million, according to Graham Lane, an old friend of Fraser who said Fraser gave that figure over dinner once. What is certain is that the Ultranet took longer to develop than it was meant to, cost more than it was meant to, delivered less than it was meant to, and fell far short of the original bold vision of the first request for tender. The Ultranet was shut down in 2013 by the NAPLAN government. By late 2010, CSG was running out of money to fund the operation and maintenance of the Ultranet. Fraser and Dennis McKenzie, CEO of CSG, had dinner at the start of 2011. McKenzie urged Fraser to seek more funding for the Ultranet so they could pay their developers. Fraser came up with the Learning Technologies Quality Assurance Project, a survey of the effectiveness of the Ultranet and other technologies recently deployed by the department in schools. Using what he called the Little Project, Fraser would pass $1 million through a company called Alliance Recruiting, which had no ability to conduct such a survey, to contract out the work to CSG, or at least appear to be doing so. Essentially, Alliance was to be a financial conduit between CSG and the department, with CSG billing Alliance, Alliance billing the department, and Alliance then paying CSG. Internal CSG emails from this time show that CSG intended the actual team to work on this project about 2 days a week. Based on final CSG internal costings, the reality was much closer to 1 day a week. Fraser sent a briefing paper to the department's purchasing body and asked them for an exemption to the requirement for the project to go to tender. If he had sought $1 million exactly, he would have no pathway for exemption. Instead, he sought $999,996. The paper suggested that the exemption was necessary as Alliance's highly technical expertise was needed, and that no one else had these skills. This was later found to be untrue, but the exemption was granted based on these and other misrepresentations. The overwhelming majority of the money allocated for this project was used on the Ultranet, save for a $60,000 fee that Alliance took for its role as the middleman. The project manager of the QA project had never been involved in writing a QA report before, and could not recall the names of any of the schools he visited in preparing the report. Internal CSG records show an average of little more than 1 day per week was spent by the part-time personnel involved, most of whom were undergraduate university students engaged to do fieldwork research and, extraordinarily, produce the final report. To conduct their field research, the student contractors visited just 10 of Victoria's 1,500 schools. A group of 6 undergraduates, as well as a graduate student, recorded 1,050 hours at a total cost to CSG of the relatively meagre sum of $36,000. The QA project manager had no idea what faculty each student was from, or their year level, or whether any had experience in report writing or working on quality assurance projects. When asked what the department should have paid for the report, Mr. Fraser candidly replied, "I probably wouldn't pay anything for it." Fraser didn't try to hide the fact that the report was not worth $1 million, nor that it was a plot to funnel money to CSG. Throughout 2011, Fraser flew around Australia, as well as to Dubai, to promote the Ultranet. He did this while employed as a Victorian public servant. At the end of 2011, Fraser took a job at CSG and was to be given incentive payments for successfully generating business for CSG as a result of promoting the Ultranet. Thus, he may have profited personally from travel and activities he ostensibly undertook as a public servant. He wiped his computer when he left and said he did so because he did not think its contents would be of any interest. His contract at CSG ended in 2013, and Fraser would later work at the Boston Consulting Group. In 2014, the Independent Broad-Based Anti-Corruption Commission began Operation Dunham, an investigation into corrupt conduct surrounding the Ultranet. Hearings were held in 2016 and a report was handed down in 2017. A former regional director at the department, Matthew Dunkley, had a call he made played back during the hearings where he asked whether one of the insider traders, John Allman, had deleted that shit and got rid of it all. It all being evidence that Dunkley wanted destroyed. Dunkley was not found to have acted corruptly and moved to the UK soon after. CSG executives Dennis McKenzie and Julianne Kerrin were charged with 5 counts of obtaining property by deception. It does not appear that either of them were convicted or sentenced to any serious punishment. McKenzie now works in Brisbane and does not list CSG on his LinkedIn. Kerrin left for the UK and now works at an Irish technology company. Darryl Fraser pleaded guilty to obtaining a financial advantage by deception and misconduct in public office. In 2020, he was sentenced to 300 hours of community service and a 2-year community correction order. A 2025 review of administrative and compliance activities in Victorian government schools found that, for the Victorian Government and Department of Education, the corporate memory of IBAC's Operation Dunham and its findings in relation to the former Ultranet project have created an understandable caution in relation to investing in IT projects. In a recording of a call played during the IBAC hearing, John Allman said, "Darryl broke every fucking rule in the book. He spent more money than he should have, but it was for the good of fucking education."
Up goes the hammer, split goes the rock. You don't know how, I wish I could stop. If I could only turn back the clock, I'd never touch a thing.